Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Live from the Blue Seats. It is just me, producer JL, today. Rob is currently in transit, and he's been kind of busy lately, and Dave is feeling under the weather. So, in the meantime, you'll just get me, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but I mean, it's not a bad thing. Anyways, I hope everyone's doing okay. This won't be a long podcast per se, but we've got some stuff to talk about. I've got a couple questions here on Blue Sky so far. So first of all, thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. My voice might be a little bit low. Try not to wake everybody here in the house, but let's jump right into it, shall we? So I'm recording this on the first night of the Four Nations Facing Off tournament, as Sidney Crosby affectionately said. And we are currently on the NHL break. The Rangers played their last game on Saturday, February 8th. We got hit with a nice snowstorm here that weekend here in the New York tri-state area, and the New York Rangers won 4-3. Now, interestingly enough, the Rangers are currently sporting a 3-2 record. 3-2 record in the month of February after a strong ending to January. Obviously, the loss came against Boston and Pittsburgh. The Pittsburgh game was on a Friday night. That was the back-to-back before the Columbus game. They also had that big 4-2 win against the Vegas Golden Knights, which was Jonathan Quick's 400th win, and then they dominated the Bruins 3-2. I think that. But the big thing that we can touch on is that JT Miller is a New York Ranger. And so far, I don't want to say mixed results, but I mean, looks to be the first one to tell you. I didn't have anything personal against JT Miller. I thought that, I guess after doing some research, I kind of was corrected on a lot of what was said about him. There was the, immaturity that he had here his first term as a Ranger, years ago, which kind of led to underperformance and his dismissal here, which I think was one of the reasons why a lot of Ranger fans were kind of, blech on it, is that, yeah, he was still a pretty good player with Vancouver, don't get me wrong, but he just, I think Ranger fans were scared, and myself included. I'm not going to sit here and tell you otherwise. But, we were kind of a little worried that, Miller wouldn't put up the numbers that we need him to put up for, this type of thing. But I guess what ended up happening was I think the maturity thing really kind of came through because he seems like a completely different player than he was his first term here. And we obviously saw it with Vancouver where he kind of basically came out of his shell. But also at the same time, you still kind of have that worry, so to speak, on exactly what you want from him. But so far in the few games that he's been here, he's done remarkably well. And obviously, he scored 2 goals in his first game as a Ranger and has been very productive just down the middle, a lot more aggressive, creating a lot more plays, looks fantastic on the power play, and has really added pretty much a kind of grit depth to a team that was sorely lacking it. And also, too, everybody was a little surprised that Mika Zibanejad going to the wing, but he's been superb there so far. Granted, he ended up playing center on the final game against Columbus on that Saturday. But overall, I mean, JT Miller essentially woke up Mika Zibanejad. He's been nothing but phenomenal here so far. And whether you want to keep him or move that contract at some point, you know, Suit put out a really good article about what Mika Zibanejad could potentially be depending on how he performs this year and possibly maybe next year. So this is kind of a good barometer now for the Rangers to see what they have. And JT Miller has been great. I'll eat my words, you know. I mean, I didn't want the trade to happen. I'll be the first one to tell you. And I know a lot of us other, a lot of us here were kind of in that camp too. You wanted a JT Miller like player, but we should, maybe we should have just, maybe focused on Miller a little bit. And he's been great. Like I said, he's been very productive down the middle, winning a lot of faceoffs. He's been very good, just kind of becoming a presence is something that the Rangers needed. This is actually the trade they should have made last year, if I'm being honest. But I guess maybe, Vancouver was still trying to go for it. And the situation with Pedersen hadn't exactly blown up the way that it did this year. But, you know, it's, uh, it's definitely working out for them now. Obviously, there's still a glaring hole on defense, and you can obviously tell what that is. But for the time being, you can see that the team is a little bit more energized with Miller out there. And they kind of seem to, gel a little bit more now, just with him there alone. Now, obviously, when it comes to a trade, you're going to lose some players, obviously, because, you have to give somebody back in return. And so the deal was JT Miller and two prospects, Eric Brandstrom and the other prospect who's not coming to me right now. I will pull his name up in a bit. But basically, um, the New York Rangers, I'm going to pull his name up right now. I want to make sure I get this trade right because I feel it's necessary to make sure that you name, every single person in the trade. Obviously, JT Miller, having played with the Rangers first couple times, was traded to the Tampa Bay Lightning. Um, let's see. Well, it says Eric Brandstrom, but I know there was another prospect involved in this deal. I want to make sure I get this right because I looked this kid up, the prospect that the Rangers ended up getting from Vancouver. And apparently this kid could be something. Oh, let's see. I just want to make sure. Also, fun fact, you know, JT Miller is on the American team for the Four Nations face-off, which honestly I think it's actually pretty cool, to be honest. A lot of people seem to have been against it, but just from the game one tonight with you know, Canada and Sweden, it was actually really nice. Actually, it was really good, and I'm eager to see how the United States does, how Finland does, and hopefully the United States can take the tournament. So the trade was J.T. Miller, Eric Brandstrom, and Jackson Dorrington to Vancouver for Filipino, Victor Mancini, and a first round pick in this year's draft. Now, say what you want. Gonna miss Filipino. I mean, spent basically the first, 7, 8 years of his career with the Rangers and was basically did everything he was asked to do. He went down to Hartford. First he came up, kind of little fire under the team. They weren't in the best position though. Fun fact: both those guys were teammates, Heedle and Miller at one point. Um, and then he goes down to Hartford, works on his game, comes back, and becomes sort of a consistent presence in the lineup, but is still kind of being thrown around a little bit. And then finally, around 2021, he figured it out. And even though there wasn't the scoring touch that we were hoping, he was still very dynamic down the middle. And not only just very dynamic down the middle, but just was also a presence. And you began to see he really started to get into his zone, and he even earned the contract that he was able to get with Vancouver, with the Rangers, and being 25 years old and just probably being one of the Rangers' best 5-on-5 players. And his role in the playoffs, for 2 years in a row, 3 years in a row, really, he was just somebody that I followed when he's came up, because around when they really began to blow it up, and I started writing around 2017, 2017, 2018, he was one of the first prospects that like really caught my eye in terms of hockey sense, like just generally speaking. So it was nice to see him grow, nice to see him turn into a legitimate NHLer. And it's going to be sad, you know, sad that he's on to Vancouver now, but I wish him nothing but the best. And, he'll be back at the Garden on March 22nd, which I'm hoping to be at that game. And that would be a nice little game to be at because I was at the game where he scored his first NHL goal. I've been to a few games, the overtime winner against the Devils. Been to a lot of games where Philip Heel made a difference, and I wish him nothing but the best of luck. The other player in this trade is Victor Mancini. So, you know, Hope, who is part of our crew, she basically kind of predicted that Victor Mancini would be this, really good player for the Rangers this season, and she was right. Granted, he was a little rough around the edges in certain aspects, but you know, for all intents and purposes, he was pretty solid, and it just sucked that there was a bit of a logjam back there. You still have Ryan Lindgren, Matthew Robertson, as much as he may not be a factor right now, he's still there. Chad Ruedel, Ryan Lindgren, Zach Jones, and then you got the other defenseman Fox and Miller and Truba at the time, and even now, before they traded him, you had Borgen and Vakanainen, and Schneider, of course. So it took a lot for Mancini to kind of show his stuff in training camp, and he made the team, and he kind of showed everybody that he was able to make it, and it's also a cool photo of him in a Mets jersey, but. So, but Vance Mancini was very good in his brief time here, and he's going to be a good defenseman. He had some ups and downs here, kind of looked a little out of place in certain instances, but that's you expect that from a young offensive type two-way defenseman. So, um, I wish him nothing but the best too, and obviously he's going to get more playing time in Vancouver. They need a guy like him who can move the puck very well. Um, Obviously, if Zach Jones weren't on the Rangers right now, then I don't think he would have been dealt. But you have to get some to lose some, and they kind of had a bit of a logjam back on defense, and that's what made Mancini expendable, because it's going to get to a point where he has to play. That's how good he was. He has to play, and at the beginning of the season when the Rangers were winning games, I mean Mancini was a part of that, and so. I wish him nothing. I wish him nothing but the best of luck, just as the same as we wish Kako and Truba the best of luck in their respective teams as well. So, but what's interesting though is, so the condition of the pick is if the 2025 draft pick is top 13 protected, then it will transfer to 2026 if it falls in the top 13. So that's just something interesting to note, especially if the Rangers are trying to make the playoffs. More than likely they make it in, then that pick is probably not going to get protected because the Rangers make it to the playoffs. They're going to try and make a deep run, of course, and that's probably going to fall out of the top 13, would assume. Um, and you look at Eric Brandstrom, who was this top prospect and still a very good player by all means, but he's kind of bounced around a little bit. Ottawa, Vegas, you know, um, he's playing for Hartford currently. Was in Vancouver for a little bit. Um, Brandstrom is uh, very similar to uh, Zach Jones. Um, so just a little, and I'm glad I'm thinking I just realized this now, which I'd remembered, was he was traded by Ottawa by Vegas, traded to Ottawa by Vegas with Oscar Lindbergh and Dallas's second round pick in 2020 for Mark Stone. So he was a part of that. And then he signed with Vancouver, or signed with Colorado last year after the season ended, but then was traded to Vancouver for Tucker Pullman. So the top prospect kind of bounced around, very similar to Zach Jones. Will be cool to see him to get some time up here with the Rangers just to kind of see what they've gotten in him. But I think with Lindgren still being on this team, which it seems like he might get dealt soon, and then obviously with Lindgren being on the team, and then obviously having to defer to Zach Jones because he's definitely earned the spot. Brandstrom is more than likely going to be your seventh defenseman because I don't think they're going to call to Chad Ruedel anytime soon, because if they did, they would have called him up already. And then Jackson Dorrington, who, still kind of a prospect. I admittedly do not know much about this guy. He was born in 2004. He's 20 years old. He's an American kid. Um, he was drafted in the 6th round. So 6'2", though, the kid is huge. So, who knows what this could turn into? Maybe this could turn into something, maybe it couldn't. But, that's just all part of how this operates with, prospects and going around. So, maybe, Dorrington could be of use or maybe be another trade piece. So now we're sitting at the Four Seasons face off, or the Four Nations face off, excuse me, Four Seasons. I'm thinking of something else. And so now your New York Rangers currently have 58 points as of this recording, and they're only 3 points out behind the Detroit Red Wings. So now who's above them, so to speak? So now you obviously have the top three teams in the Metro: Washington, Carolina, and the Devils, which, let's be real here. Uh, unless Washington turns into some powerhouse, they're beatable. Carolina, 70 points, obtainable, also beatable. Okay. You basically have a month and a half to kind of catch up. And then New Jersey, the closest one, they are a couple points ahead with 68. So they're third. And then you got Ottawa and Detroit, 62 points, 61 points. The Rangers at 58. So your first game back from the Four Nations tournament, which would be the following week, is against the Sabres, and then the next day against the Penguins. So both of those games are critical in terms of what exactly will happen with the Rangers and where that could determine where they'll be, because you have to start off quick in order to stay in the race. They shot themselves in the foot with this kind of lackluster play, kind of moping around, and this, and that, and the fourth, whatever you want to call it. But they shot themselves in the foot, because if they had just played like this, the way that they're playing now, even halfway through the end of November into December, then we wouldn't be really talking about this, But they did this to themselves. Obviously, we knew they weren't going to win the President's Trophy this year. Things were a bit different. Things were a bit up in the air. Now there's a little bit more cohesiveness to this team. So now they're actually playing like it. Still some hiccups here and there, like that game against Pittsburgh. It's 3-2. They should have won. Igor was a couple of suspect on a couple of goals. Defensively, it wasn't the worst effort, but it could have been better. There was a lot of holes exposed in the game. But either way, what's in the past is in the past. And so now this is where the playoff run begins. Well, it already started, but this is where it really begins to ramp up, because you have Buffalo, you have Pittsburgh, and then you have the you have the Islanders in UBS. And then to end the month, on the final day of the month, you have the Toronto Maple Leafs. And then if you switch over into March, ton of games. I mean, this is the make or break month, obviously. You start, Nashville, Islanders at home. Then you have Washington at home, Ottawa on the road, Columbus at home, Winnipeg, Minnesota, and Columbus on the road. And then you basically have, from the 16th to the 22nd, you basically have a game every other day. You have Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, and Vancouver. And this is all packed within the weekend. It's the same thing the week prior. The 2 weeks prior, you have the second and the third back to back: Nashville, Islanders, day off, Washington, 2 days off, Ottawa, then another back to back, Columbus, 1 day off, out to Winnipeg, day off, Minnesota, day off, Columbus, and then you have another back to back, which is against Edmonton, day off, Calgary, day off, Toronto, day off, Vancouver. And then they get 2 days off and they head out west. They play the Kings, the Ducks, and the Sharks, which is also back to back out west. And then you finally get into April, which is another make or break. For April, you have to play the Devils again at one point, the Flyers, the Islanders again at UBS, Carolina. In Carolina, you have to play the Panthers and the Lightning, one on the road and one at home. Minnesota, you play at the beginning of April. So it's a lot of packed in because of the 2 weeks off here. But you hope that this break, for those who are not participating in the tournament, which I'm going to do this off the top of my head, it's Kreider, Miller, Fox, Vakanainen, Kreider, Miller, Fox, Trocheck, Vakanainen, Zibanejad, and I might be missing one. So let me do this again because I have to. Fox, Miller, Trocheck, Kreider, Zibanejad and Vakanainen. That should be all of the players because I feel like I'm saying one and then I'm not. So it's Kreider, Miller, Trocheck, Fox, Zibanejad, and Vakanainen. There we go. So, outside of those players, you hopefully everybody gets a good, much needed rest over the next couple days because it's just going to be full bore once we start. And I will be at the Sabres game and also be at the Penguins game when they come back. So I'll get a good glimpse of how the team will look once they come back. Now, I would like to go to that Islander game, but I mean, we'll see depending on what happens with my schedule. But that would be something cool to go check out. Go to 3 hockey games in a row. That'd be actually pretty nice. But, anyways, so hopefully, with JT Miller coming around, the Rangers look really good. And hopefully they can keep that momentum up. So now we're going to get into the questions real quick. We didn't really get much, but it's an interesting topics to talk about. So one question that I got on Blue Sky, and also thank you for setting these in, by the way. So this is from Captain Jack. I think this was one of Dave's, I'm not going to say it. I'll wait till I don't want to get it wrong. But Captain Jack, thank you, Captain Jack. This is on Blue Sky, and he asks for talking point. He says the Rangers trading for 3C and a possible left D. What do you think about these guys? So he names Tommy Novak. He has 2 years term. Alex Kerfoot, Jake Wallman, Oli Mata, and Jake Evans. So I think all those are pretty good. I'm not too sold on Oli Mata just because I think that you can get a better defenseman. It's nothing against Mata, but I think if you're going to go for a defenseman, I think Jake Wallman and possibly Brian Dumoulin would probably be your best option. Obviously, they wouldn't necessarily be number one guys, but if you're playing with Adam Fox, it doesn't really matter. Um, but Lindgren is obviously the issue, and you hate to say that, all things considered, because Lindgren has done nothing but really done a lot for this team. He was really good up until like 2 years ago. The advanced numbers show it. I don't have those in front of me right now, but it doesn't take much to figure that out. But you know, you obviously have to think that they're going to try and improve on that aspect. And so I think Jake Wallman would be pretty good. And pretty much for most of these guys, just to kind of touch on it, it would only really cost draft picks and maybe depending on the type, it'd just be prospects, like lower end prospects, ones that are kind of like on the fringe, so to speak, if it has to get to that point. Tommy Novak might be the one to command that, but I also don't think Nashville would want to move him because, they're still trying to figure their thing out. The thing about Nashville, and this is just my observation, is that, they sign all these guys and, on paper, they do have a good team. And I think they just need to tweak it a little bit in order for them to really kind of get back to where they want to go. Because you have guys like Roman Yossi, Philip Forsberg, Jonathan Marchessault, Steven Stamkos, Ryan O'Reilly. It's not, they're not, it's just not working out. It's just like not really a cohesive unit. But I think Barry Trotz, just kind of having a good hockey, sense will find a way to kind of get that unit together. They have a lot of firepower. It just hasn't really, worked out. So you could throw Ryan O'Reilly's name in there too. That'd be a pretty good center option, for the Rangers, and his contract wouldn't cost much, especially if they decide to retain, because he'd be here next year. So, that'd be the perfect 3C for that. Um, Alex Kerfoot, I think I think with Montreal kind of, you know, maybe I have to make sure I get this right. I should have this in front of me already, but I have to make sure that this is the right one, because I tend to mix up my player names sometimes. Um, okay, so Kerfoot, I'm thinking of somebody. I'm thinking of Alex Newhook. Okay, sorry. Alex Kerfoot of the Utah Jazz. The Utah Jazz. Goodness gracious, the Utah Hockey Club. Sorry, it's a little early in the morning and I haven't finished eating yet, but I got the brain is mush. Um, Alex Newhook. That's who I'm thinking of. Alex Newhook. The names are very similar. So, but no, you're talking, and this question is asking about Alex Kerfoot. So, I don't necessarily think Utah will trade him, so to speak. Seems like he's done pretty well in Utah. He is one of their alternate captains too, so I doubt that they'll try to move on from him. I mean, it wouldn't be a terrible option, so to speak. I'm just pulling up his numbers now. Um, eh, I mean, they could probably do a little bit better than Kerfoot, but I feel like in the right system, or just maybe if he came here with a little more firepower, he might be okay. But I feel like if they're gonna make this sort of move for 3C, I think maybe even Jake Evans might actually fit that a little more. And I know Tyler tends to kind of, there's always like one or two guys that, and this, shout out to Tyler McGillick. He's great. Um, he always tends to kind of hitch his wagon to somebody. I know Dave was on the Jordan Eberle train. I was on the Elias Patterson train for a very long time. And Tyler is either Yanni Gord or now his new love is Jake Evans. And Jake Evans wouldn't be a terrible option. Um, you know, it's definitely something to think about. And although Montreal is interested in signing him, they also have expressed that they might want to move him. You know, um, he's got 27 points on the season so far. He's a +2, so he's definitely responsible, even though you don't really want to go off a plus minus. But 11 goals, 16 assists in 56 games played. So, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily be the worst thing to do. I think that would cost a couple of picks and maybe a fringe prospect, if anything. He seems to be a pretty steady force for the Canadians, and he's only 28, so it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world for the Rangers to do that. But it just all depends if Montreal wants to let him go. That's the thing. So definitely Jake Evans would be there. So probably I think I feel like Tommy Novak would have been the guy that they wanted because his name kept circling around with the Rangers for so long. But I think with Nashville locking him up, I think that might be a bit harder to obtain. So excluding Novak, it would probably be sort of a mix of Jake Evans if they're looking for a 3C, Jake Evans, Jake Wallman for defense, and maybe Ryan O'Reilly if they want to get, a little bit more rambunctious on that aspect. Olimata, I'm not really counting on because, it doesn't seem as reliable. So, all right. So, this next and last question comes from Dan on Blue Sky, Daniel passes.bsky.social. And he says, adding Miller had him thinking. If you could add one or more former Ranger to the current roster, who would you choose? Retired, currently playing, whichever. Huh. Now I didn't think of this. I'm reading this question for the first time and I'm trying to come up with the right answer for it because right now there is it's interesting because I can obviously say Brian Leach, well that's just too obvious of an answer. Brian Leach would solve this team's problems and just him being there. If you were able to bring back Brian Leach, you pop him right next to Adam Fox and that's your first pair. And they will dominate, and Fox will be so much better. But that's kind of an easy answer, so to speak. If you say Messier, well, then where are you going to put him? It depends. Do you want Rangers Messier? Because if we're talking Rangers Messier, because we're talking Rangers, then that's your third center. And even though Messier was, is a Hall of Famer, Messier was probably at the peak at the end of his career with the Rangers. Even like played for way longer than he should have. But so Messier comes in and he solves your third goalie problem. Uh, hmm. I'm just trying to think because there's so many guys you could fit. If you want to kind of talk wingers, I mean, you put a guy like Marian Gaborik with a guy like Artemi Panarin would be fantastic. Obviously, they'd have to figure out who's going to wear the number 10. Maybe somebody switches, but I mean, you put a Gaborik with a Panarin or even with like a Zibanejad, Kreider, Zibanejad, Gaborik. I mean, come on. I mean, just thinking about it is pretty good. Um, it's I feel like what I'm gonna answer the question, but I want to save this and hopefully I won't forget. I'll save this question, Dan, for when the guys come back, because I'm interested to hear their responses, because I feel like they would have a sort of a different response from what I've had. So my obvious choice would be Brian Leach. It'd be a defenseman. So Brian Leach, maybe Kevin Klein, and I'm thinking of who would play with Adam Fox. Um, you want to go to, Ron Greshner, maybe Brad Park, you know. Um, so I would primarily focus on defense, and Brian Leach is the obvious answer, of course. Brian Berard wouldn't be a bad option too. Brian Berard, even though in the condition that he was in, miraculously able to come back after that eye injury, he wasn't terrible with the Rangers. He's quick, so that might help with playing with Fox. But the obvious answer for me, oh, you know what? Honestly, you know what? Not even just Brian Leach, Sergei Zubov. I think would be pretty good to play with this team because, you know, Zubov ended up becoming a really good offensive defenseman, and he was just also just really good in his own zone too. So I feel like having a guy like Zubov who kind of has a very similar skill set, just maybe a little, maybe a little tougher, I guess. Maybe I might be wrong on that. He was always very skilled, and he kind of, muscled up a little bit after he left the Rangers. Obviously won Stanley Cups with the Dallas Stars, of course, but Sergei Zubov or Brian Leach would be my choice. But I'm gonna keep this question, Dan. Thank you again so much, and thank you to Captain Jack for his question as well, or his comment. I'm gonna save that question, Dan, because I want to hear what Dave and Rob have to say. But I think that'd be a good question for like a poll. I may put that up. But that's a great question. Thank you. Um, Please, if you're listening, please feel free to send us questions on Blue Sky or on Twitter. We like to answer your questions, and we like to kind of, engage with you guys a little more, and, kind of, just chat about that a little bit. But anyways, so like I said, wasn't going to be a long podcast. Um, Wanted to get something out for you guys, as the other guys are, not feeling too well or just busy. So, and obviously with there's really not much going on outside of the Four Nations, and we'll, next time we record, we'll kind of have a little bit of a recap on who did what so far. Mika looked pretty good in that game against Sweden, even though the Swedish were kind of off to start the game. They ended up tying it, and Canada ended up winning it overtime on a beautifully set up play by Sidney Crosby. I mean, he skates forward, drops it off, goes offside, and gets off the ice onto the bench before uh, they could deem it offside. I mean, that's just a elite level skill right there by Crosby. And I'm watching the NHL Network kind of recap, and it's McDavid, McKinnon, and McDavid, Crosby, and McKinnon on a power play, which, I mean, goodness gracious. But anyways, so that's pretty much it. There really isn't much else to talk about. JT Miller having been nothing but a pleasant surprise, and the Rangers looking a lot better, and still kind of maintaining the pace. That win against Columbus was huge. That kind of kept them in it. It would have been nice if they had won that game against Pittsburgh, since I was there and all, too. But it's things are looking up and up, and keep the faith, because now they're getting in the crunch time, and I think they pull it out. Hopefully my face isn't red and I'm not wrong. But anyways, thank you so much for taking the time out to listen. This has been Live from the Blue Seats. This is producer JL coming at you by himself, and hopefully next time we record, we can have the crew back here with us together. So anyways, we'll catch you on the flip side, and let's go Rangers.